Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm flying solo tonight. Eddie is once again abandoning me, off sailing the high seas or whatever the hell he might be doing. But I'm coming to you all just from the conclusion of UFC 319 going down at the United Center in Chicago, Illinois. This is Zane Simon, your host, as always. And we just witnessed one of the most lopsided championship title fight losses in the promotion's history, right up there with Juliana Pena against Amanda Nunes for the second fight, right up there with JDS versus Cain Velasquez for their second fight. Hard to think of many title fights where a champion didn't just get outright demolished. Jose Aldo or Eddie Alvarez style against Conor McGregor, where they got so thoroughly humiliated for the entire course of the title fight than Dricus du Plessis did here. I don't want to crow too loud, but I was really going into this. I was really on the train that Dricus might just have no prayer in this one. His title defenses, his title win against Sean Strickland, and his defenses against Israel Adesanya and Strickland, his victory over Whitaker, those were all really quality wins from Dricus. I'm not going to take anything away from his durability, his strength, his intensity. I mean, even in this fight, the fact that he was able to come back in round 5 and still put together offense and still make Chimaev pay for mistakes in round 5 and almost even squeak out a winning round at the end of this fight is a huge testament to why he was champion in the first place. But everything else, I mean, it's just that run that du Plessis had post Derek Brunson absolutely did not test any of his wrestling or grappling at all. It purely let him exist as a striker. And man, like, all you had to do going into this fight was watch that Derek Brunson fight and think, if he lets this happen to Chimaev, is he ever going to be able to build back from it? And yeah, there was no way. He didn't. His wrestling instincts are all bad. It was a terrible sign right out of the gate when the first 2 things he did for the first 2 takedowns he faced were to jump on a guillotine and hold it to the point that Chimaev was in side control and he still had an arm around his neck. It's just like, automatically you've set the stage where your first instincts are so poorly positioned for your success that there's no way you're going to be able to build it. I mean, it was a lot like Pena versus Harrison, where, a lot of people going into that were like, oh man, but like Kayla Harrison can get tired and Juliana Pena is always down to scrap. And what if Harrison starts to gas and Juliana Pena starts to pour it on her and all that? And it's just like, but what if Juliana Pena never puts up enough of a fight for Harrison to ever have to even really work? And this is what that was. This is exactly the same thing. It's like, yeah, maybe Chimaev might have, he at the very least has had a history of running out of ideas when he can't get a first round finish, of getting less aggressive, less sure of himself. But if you never make him have to second guess anything he's doing at all, even if he's not going to finish you, there's no way that Chimaev is ever going to slow down. And he didn't. even the success that Dricus had late, I mean, yeah, probably Chimaev was pushing himself to a point where he didn't have the energy to complete some of the takedowns he was going for late, but a lot of it also just felt like Dricus was also maybe finally sweaty enough that Chimaev was slipping off. Things just were a little more difficult to hold on to. And yeah, it was terrible. And I got to say, too, I don't know. I get that there's some new judging criteria out there that really makes 10-8 have to have all three of the 3D criteria, the duration, domination, and damage. But I gotta say, it seems really just pure kindness and underselling to Chimaev's success in any way, shape, or form to only give him one 10-8 round. I could see 3 as a minimum. I would say that there were 3 10-8 rounds, or there were 3 rounds where Dricus had so little offense in the fight that he effectively was not competing at all. Like, I don't care about, at that point, I don't care about how much damage you're doing. If you are constantly able to attain really dominant grappling positions like crucifix, like side control, that to me, like back control, those to me are dominant enough that they should be considered like damage. Like if you're spending your whole round on top of somebody in guard and they're not getting anything done, then that is a fairly neutral position, even if you're on top. If you're on top in somebody's guard and you're just kind of laying on them, that's pretty neutral. I'm fine with that being a really ugly 10-9. But if you're in side control, or you're in crucifix, or you're in back mount, or you're in mount, and you're staying there the whole round and you're putting pressure on and you're landing shots, even if they're not hugely damaging shots, that should be considered as created damage for the criteria of a 10-8. We have to reward, like, I am the least interested in grappling of any MMA diehard out there. Like, I do not care about watching a BJJ match. It's terrible. It's boring. I don't care about watching wrestling. It's terrible. It's boring. I don't need it. But you have to have criteria that rewards dominant technical grappling as a fundamental part of MMA to keep that in the mix. Like, that has to be part of the recipe. I'm seeing Chad here say it wasn't clean and clear enough. It is clean and clear. That is as clean as it gets. When you've got somebody in crucifix and you're keeping them there, that is as cleanly dominant as grappling gets. There is no way short of submitting somebody, to have a more dominant grappling position. There is not. It can't happen. This to me is a absolute textbook version of grappling dominance that should be rewarded. So that is my little rant about the scoring. That Chimaev, I frankly scored this fight 50-41. I know that that's going to feel ridiculous to people, but Dricus was not in the fight at all. He did not compete in 4 rounds of that fight. And giving him a 10-9 for rounds where he did not show up. Like, I'll look at this. Look at the stats here. See what we've got here for the stats on this. And we'll look at total strikes clearly, because that's, there were not a lot of significant strikes landed since it was all mostly grappling. Dricus got outlanded in total strikes 529 to 45. He got outlanded 131 to 3 in round 1, 79 to 6 in round 2, 156 to 9 in round 3, 76 to 8 in round 4, and 87 to 19 in round 5. Round 5 is the generous 10-9 round. There's no way you should be outlanding somebody 131 to 3 with positional dominance. I don't care how much damage it does. I don't at that point. Like, that is the absolute. That has to be a 10-8 to me. I don't see how you can possibly say that is not a deserving of a dominant scoring round. So that's my rant. Dricus du Plessis, we've talked about it a lot on the Vivi over the years. He is the poster boy for the era of the $2 champ, an era of UFC champions that just don't seem like they're really very good at all. Like, he's not a great striker. He's not a great wrestler. He's not a great grappler. He is a amazing physical specimen, but there's no, with no technical base to lean on at all, it was really remarkable that this man became champion. It did not feel like, if you go back to the era of Anderson Silva, GSP, Aldo, all in their prime, that you would get champions that look like Dricus du Plessis. It feels like a Dricus du Plessis he would have been the Nate Marquardt of, the Anderson Silva era. But this era has been there's a bunch of different things going into it. On the one hand, the UFC is keeping a lot of filler fighters on their roster a lot more. There is a lot of they're giving guys a lot more chances to stick around after losses. We're seeing a huge meta shift underneath in the core of the sport over the importance of output and cardio from years past. And all of these changes, both in the UFC structure and in the changes in MMA as a whole, are pushing a lot of fighters to title contention that are, like I said, they don't feel like they would have been title fighters in years past. And Chimaev kind of laid that bare today. This looked like a real championship game and a real championship skill set against somebody who had been finding just the right fights at just the right time to become champion. Anyway, people asking, what do I think about Chimaev versus Hernandez? I'm fine with that as an idea. Like, in terms of, Hernandez is currently ranked 7th, but it could easily be, like, I think Hernandez should probably fight somebody like Rainer de Ritter next, and he could leapfrog the winner of Bahayo Imavov if that fight is not good or interesting. But in general, the winner of Bahayo Imavov is probably getting a shot. In terms of what I think would happen in Hernandez versus Chimaev, I would still have to favor Chimaev. And the base rule for that would be simply that Hernandez is down for exactly the same kind of fight that Chimaev wants and prefers. He wants to be in there. He wants to be tying up. He wants to wrestle with Chimaev. But I just don't think he's fast enough or strong enough to keep pace. Or at least not early. And if he's not fast enough and strong enough to keep pace with Chimaev early, Is there a chance he can come back when Chimaev's tired and start to rally on him? Sure, if he can really wear Chimaev out, but I don't think the secret to beating Chimaev is to start out with him in exceedingly dominant positions. And I don't think it ever is going to be, you know? And if you watch like Hernandez against Brendan Allen, that's a fight where Hernandez gets mounted and put on his back like almost immediately. Hernandez is not the strongest or fastest guy out there. He's just one of the most relentless. And we've seen like Hernandez against, early in his career against other really good grapplers like Marcus Perez, where he got submitted, or, against Kevin Holland, where he got put away. But I mean, I still don't trust Hernandez against a really elite athlete who would welcome his pressure and pace with their own athleticism and pace. Like Dolidze has always been a very slow-paced fighter. He's a guy who really wants the fight to be controlled. So when Hernandez went out there and starts putting a pace on him, Dolidze is constantly fighting to try and get Hernandez to slow down. Chimaev isn't going to be doing that. Chimaev, if Hernandez goes out there and is throwing shots and looking to lunge his way into the pocket, then Chimaev is going to meet him and he's going to out-wrestle him at the moment that they meet in the pocket. Could Hernandez potentially turn that long-term into getting Chimaev exhausted enough to lose? Could happen, but I don't ever like to start with this guy is going to lose to a fighter like Chimaev. It's like Khabib, when Khabib was at his height. And people would be like, oh, well, if you can just wear Khabib out and like get him through, get him to really push the pace and put his wrestling on you for round after round, maybe he'll start to slow down. And I know a lot of fans didn't think that, but it was one of those things that commentators would bring up and all that. It's like you can't start out in a wrestler against with that kind of quality. You cannot start in a hole and expect to dig your way out. Yeah, so I don't know. I would say, the winner of Imavov Bahayo is actually interesting to me as an opponent for Chimaev, because I think both of those fighters have the ability to maintain range and pick spots and potentially wrestle well enough to at least fight their way to their feet and make Chimaev have to contend with them outside repeatedly. Like I say, I think the thing with somebody like Hernandez would just be that he's never going to want to stay away. He's never going to want to keep any distance, make Chimaev come to him, make Chimaev work to get to him. And without that, it's really, I don't know. It feels like a foregone conclusion to me that he's going to start behind and then have to work too hard to get ahead. I am interested in the winner of Imavov versus Bahayo. I think that should be Kyle Bahayo, just because Imavov kind of can lull into a very kind of comfortable, slow-paced striking exchange that Bahayo has tended to be smart enough to figure out and to fight his way around. But so I think Bahayo versus Chimaev would be interesting, and that might be what we get next. But it could also be, like I say, if that fight becomes really boring, if Imavov versus Bahayo just sucks and they stare at each other for 5 rounds, then the option for somebody like Hernandez to get one fight and leapfrog them, or De Ridder to get one fight and leapfrog them, is right there. And we'll see how that shakes out. But the other part of this is, of course, I'm not actually all that sure that Chimaev is going to care about or want to defend his belt anytime soon. I talked about this a lot going in on the Vivi this week. Chimaev, and I've talked about this before in the past with Chimaev. He reminds me a lot of Conor McGregor. And I cannot help but thinking that his first interest, now that he's champion, will be to try and make a run at a light heavyweight title. And, or just, this is also somebody with enough money backing them, with all of his political connections, both to Kadyrov and to Dubai and to the incredibly, incredibly rich dictators of those countries. Like, having that belt around his waist is going to be a huge point of pride for him, and risking it in low low value, low interest middleweight title defenses could be the last thing he wants to do. Like, is Caio Bahayo going to sell pay-per-views across from Khamzat Chimaev? Is Anthony Hernandez? Is Reiner de Ritter? Is Nasruddin Imavov? The kind of person that would sell across from him would be somebody like Sean Strickland or Israel Adesanya or a Dricus rematch, and none of them are particularly close to getting that fight. So the more likely option would be to go up and try and fight somebody like, well, probably not. Oh, God damn it. Our light heavyweight champ. Probably not Ankalaev, because they are both Kadyrov guys. But, to try to fight somebody like Alex Pereira or Yuri Prochazka or something like that. Like, I don't know. It might be one of these things where Chimaev's his first title defense won't happen for several years. For what I think about Chimaev versus Ankalaev, I would probably pick Ankalaev in that fight, just because I think he's got the size and the stoicism and the dedication to craft and range and all of that to make that fight really hard on Chimaev up at light heavyweight. But yeah, I agree that more that Khamzat versus Yuri would be good, stupid fun. That would be hilarious. Otherwise, on the flip side, for Dricus du Plessis, coming off this loss, obviously he should be searching out the loser of Bahayo versus Imavov, or a rematch against Israel Adesanya. That seemed like a pairing that would be destined for multiple fights, and we only got one, and it was a good fight. I don't know if Adesanya is in any place to take it, but it would be one of the more interesting things to do with Dricus right now. All right. Moving on. Lerone Murphy, Aaron Pico. And man, if you watched the video this week, we got a shitload of picks wrong. All of our main card picks except for Kai Asakura were right, so that's good. But all of our prelim picks pretty much were wrong, except for Loopy. She came through for us. But if you watched, then you know that we basically thought Lerone Murphy was a nightmare matchup for Aaron Pico. The reasons being that while Pico is a really hot starter and Murphy is a slow starter, and Pico might look really good right out of the gate against Murphy, Murphy is also one of the toughest, best adjusting featherweights in the division. Just an absolutely uncrackable chin, and really good at figuring out what you're trying to do to him and coming up with solutions. And Pico being a guy who He's I call him Michael Chandler 2.0. He's all gas, no brakes, has no feeling for how to fight any way other than just going forward and swinging hammers. Made him incredibly predictable from Murphy to time. And that's what this was. Pico rushed out of the gate, started blasting Murphy, looked great. And then it's just like, if all you're going to do is push forward at one tempo, you don't feint anything, you don't move your head ever, and you're always going to be right there in front of somebody, then guys are going to, they're going to key in on that. And Murphy, he threw that spinning elbow. Oh, chef's kiss. Beautiful shot. Flatlined Pico. It's both. That's the thing with Pico. It's not just bad chin, it's bad striking defense. I think the big problem for Pico is that he just doesn't have eyes for defense. He is completely, I think a guy like Patrick Cummings is a really good comp for Aaron Pico, where they are so tracked in. Or even, oh God, what was Phil Haas too, where these fighters are so tracked in on what they're doing and what their offense is supposed to be and what they've been drilling and what they're ready to do to their opponent, that when shots do come back at them, it shocks them down to the core. It just shakes their whole body. You can see every time that Lerone Murphy landed something on Pico, it just jolted him. And it was a shot he had no idea was coming at all. And yeah, that's always going to be a problem for Pico. It's, you can get through that if you have an absolutely unbreakable chin. But if you have just a normal chin, like maybe his chin isn't awful. He's certainly been in plenty of fights where he gets finishes and gets hit and doesn't get knocked out. He got hit several times by Lerone Murphy and didn't get knocked out. But if every shot is a complete surprise, then every fight is going to include that danger. So it's going to be one of those things for Pico where he's probably going to tear off like another 4 or 5 wins or something like that in a row. And then the next time he loses, it's going to be a crushing, deadening loss. People are, saying like, oh my God, he needs to reconsider his career and all that. I mean, yeah, if this is going to be an Achilles heel, then you might be taking the kind of damage that is not good for you long term. But it's also happened to him before, and he's dealt with it. So, he's probably going to be ready to jump right back in and have it happen to him again. I don't know. I just feel bad for him because he's somebody that, like, I remember other media people before he even made his debut were talking about how he's the next Fedor, how he's going to be the next all-time great fighter. And this is a kid who had 0 amateur fights and who's, he was a seriously talented young wrestler, but did not actually progress to like the heights of the international stage as a wrestler either. And as a, Gold Gloves boxer or whatever that was, like he had amateur boxing, but that's not even a lot of Gold Gloves boxing is not good high level boxing. So all of his experience that he had, like, it prepared him really well to be a violent fighter, but it did not really prepare him to be, I don't know. Like, it just felt like he got fed into pro MMA without any real pro experience or anything to set him up for pro experience. He got fed in as like he was going to be a high level pro from day one without going through any of the kind of difficulty, the learning curve that most MMA, even very good MMA fighters, go through. Like, I think about Fedor, and like before Fedor was ever in MMA, he was a Combat Sambo champion. And Combat Sambo might not be a 1-for-1 MMA, but it is a lot like doing a lot of amateur MMA. He came in fully ready for high pay, full paced fist fighting. And I think it's only ever done him a disservice. And I don't know. I mean, he's got the physical tools. He's got a well-rounded enough game that he's violent enough and exciting enough that he will always have a home as a fun fighter. But, so somebody asking, okay, does Pico crack the top 5? I mean, yeah, maybe once, maybe. But if he's like a if it's perennial top 5er, where it's the difference between being like somebody like, I don't know, Josh Emmett, who was top 5 for a couple of days, or being Calvin Kattar, or like Arnold Allen, who's going to be top 5 for a long time, or something like that. I think he could maybe see it on the right run of fights for a minute, but much more likely is that he ends up in sort of a Dan Ige spot where he is just, always dangerous, always fun, but his game isn't, it isn't compact. It isn't solid enough to be a true elite game. He can't stay up there and have elite top tier fights all the time and win. Maybe somebody like Dariush would be a better comp for him at that point, where Dariush has been a top 5 lightweight for a minute here and there, but most of the time Dariush ends up staying right around the edges of the top 10, because every time Dariush gets a top 5 fighter to try and reinforce that top 5 ranking he's earned, he gets blasted so far out of this universe that you can't really think of him that way. So I don't know. It's hard to know the future, but at this point, as a fighter who is already coming up on 30 now and has been in MMA for 8 years now, I kind of feel like Aaron Pico is the guy he's going to be at this moment. And that guy he might still be that guy for the next 5 or 6 or 7 years, and might make little improvements in that time. But I don't know that we're ever going to see an Aaron Pico that's like a true championship contender. On the flip side, though, people are talking about him versus Emmett or something like that. I mean, I don't know. I think I would say you got to do something like maybe Pico versus Landwehr. Or, Andre Fili's coming off a win. I wouldn't mind seeing, like I say, Pico versus Landwehr, or Pico versus Hyder Emil. or Pico versus Jack Jenkins, even. Like, just give him. I mean, I guess at his price point, though, they do have to find something pretty meaningful for him. So at that point, probably somebody like a Chikadze or a Landwehr, or yeah, somebody mentioning the Santos Duho Choi winner. Yeah, Duho Choi Pico would be a lot of fun, since Choi was also a golden boy who took a long time to come around and look like a really complete top tier fighter. So I'd be fascinated by that as well. But yeah, I'll say for now, I'll say Pico versus Landwehr would be the kind of fight I'd book him in. That brings us to a welterweight bout: Carlos Proess, Jeff Neal, and oh, I may be a longtime Fighting Nerds hater because they're not actual nerds. They are just they are bros with great marketing, and I hate it. But that said, Carlos Proess is an amazingly cool dude, and every time he wins a fight, I just can't help but feel a warm glow deep down inside. And watching him against Jeff Neal, this is, we talked earlier this week, what we wanted to see out of Jeff Neal was more insistence, more pressure, more aggression. Don't let Proess set the tone of the fight. Don't let him set the pace. And Neal did that. He did well to do that in bursts. And when he did it, he had a lot of success with it. But what I also wanted to see was, I really wanted to see Proess up his game and start including more little pieces, to not just be so lackadaisical, to not try to make the entire fight happen based on poise and pressure alone. And I feel like we got a little bit of both from both men. Like, Neal did come out, he was more aggressive, he did try to lead more, and Proess came out and he was throwing some kicks. He was popping Neal here and there. He wasn't letting Neal run him down too much. And then he's still just one of the most amazingly carefully timed power hitters out there. Just a fight with impeccable timing when you're going to come after him. That was ultimately why I picked Proess here, was just that I felt Neal is, whether he's going forward or backwards, he's too predictable. And that was, Neal couldn't come out there and pump 1-2s at Proess and try to catch him with speed alone over and over again and have it work. That spinning elbow KO was absolutely gorgeous. And he called out Leon Edwards afterward, which, hey, you know what? That's a really smart call out. Also, apparently, Proess and MVP have talked about fighting each other, which I want to see MVP stay at middleweight, I'll admit. But you know what? If it gets Proess on that October 11th card, and MVP is talking about it, he still has a welterweight in his mind and all that, then sure, why not? I have a lot more trust that MVP versus Proess would be a super weird fight, whereas Proess versus Edwards might just be a kind of boring one. I don't know. So, sure, if they want to fight each other, I'm down. As for Jeff Neal, I mean, he's not short on options. He can fight Gilbert Burns. He can fight Colby Covington. He can fight Joaquin Buckley. All of them are coming off losses. I don't think Covington's actually going to fight again, but I'd love to see Jeff Neal versus Joaquin Buckley. That sounds like a great fight. So book that. All right, that brings us to a middleweight bout. Michael Paige, Jared Cannonier. And man, Michael Paige is king of the meme fighters. And when I say meme fighter, what I mean is fighter who produces almost exclusively highlights. And when they don't produce highlights, their game looks like it barely even exists. Like they barely know how to fight MMA. Paige is their god emperor. Shara Bullett's up there. But this was the perfect example of exactly what that means in a fight, because Paige would have, Ryan Hall, that's a good shout too. Ryan Hall is an absolute meme fighter as well. But, Paige, he had Jared Cannonier so frustrated. He was basically winning, I'll check the stats here. He was winning those rounds on over the first 2 rounds of that fight. He landed 11 significant strikes in each round. And each round of the first 2 rounds was absolutely his. In fact, he's not credited with a knockdown in either one officially, which is bullshit. And then the moment he gets too slick with it, too pretty, too cute with his game in round 3, you can see there's absolutely nothing there. Jerry Cannonier gets on top of him, and Michael Page's game does not exist. So it is, it's always fascinating to watch somebody like that fight, because one of the great things, depending on how you look at it, one of the terrible and great things about MVP is that he really doesn't care if you like his fights or not. He does not fight to entertain the audience. He's very clearly just out there vibing and fighting to entertain himself, though he will fight the most boring fight imaginable if it makes his opponent mad and if it entertains him. And it's always wild to me because it's such a razor's edge that he's on. If he's agreed to fight Carlos Proess, that's a fascinating fight. He could easily frustrate Proess to no end. They do both have that spider monkey build, though, so it might be a rare time where, Paige can actually get touched out at his range. And that could make the whole thing that much more interesting. I don't know. Otherwise, if Paige is just going to be frustrating, it could look a lot like Proess versus Ian Gary. So I personally wanted to see, not because it would have been particularly good. Other people are saying, they want to see MVP versus Paulo Costa, which, that would have been fun and funny. Great fight. I want to see how far MVP can take his incredible meme fighting style. I want to see if he could win a title in this division. I mean, certainly he can't while Chimaev is champ, but if DDP had still stayed up there, I would have been fascinated by it. So the fight I really wanted to see was MVP versus Adesanya, because that is a fight that if you'd asked me 2 or 3 years ago, I would have been absolutely convinced Adesanya wins that fight every day of the week. Is just too slick, too talented, has too much volume, and can, put together too much offense for MVP. But at this point with Adesanya and his slowdown and his fragility, that might be a fight MVP wins. Might be a fight where I pick MVP. And at that point, if he beats Adesanya, suddenly he's right there in title contention, which I would have loved to see, like MVP. I know somebody saying that would be a staring contest. It would be. I get that. I'm not saying I want to see it because it's good. I want to see it because I think MVP might win it. And then otherwise, then we could get MVP versus Sean Strickland, which I think would be absolutely hilarious. Anyway, it sounds like we're getting MVP versus Proess. That's fine. For that, Tim Elliott, Kai Asakura, and man, Kai Asakura Japanese fighters in the UFC just always disappoint. He was flowing on Tim Elliott for a round with no problems at all. And then he got taken down once, and that put a little bit of a scare into him. And then he basically just nuked himself out of that fight. And Tim Elliott is not, it's Tim Elliott, his striking, his game would not work if he were not as durable as he is. His chin is insane. Asakura blasted him with a ton of shots that should have hurt him a lot more than they did. But Tim Elliott, he doesn't get hurt that way. And Asakura, he's got really solid, honestly, first level takedown defense. He sprawls well. He scrambles up to his feet well. But in prolonged scrambles where he has to make multiple moves, he does not keep up with an elite grappling pace. And that's become a huge problem for him. And it's enough of one, like people are we're comparing him, I saw, to like Mano Kopp, and being like, well, Kopp had a bad run in his early UFC fights too, and now he's up there as a contender and all that. The thing is, Kopp had a couple of fights that he narrowly lost to good fighters because he didn't know how to push a pace at an elite UFC level. He was very used to pressure counter fighting, where he would pressure and then make his opponent throw and respond to that. And he wasn't used to setting an elite high level pace. And so he was getting outpaced. But that was it. It wasn't like Kopp was getting finished or hurt or out-slicked. It was really just not adjusting to the pace of the fight yet. And the way Asakura is losing, opponents they're going to key in on this. They are all going to key in on, if I can keep making him wrestle, if I can make him have to scramble with me for a prolonged period of time, he's going to make the kind of errors that give the fight away. And that seems like it's just going to be a huge problem for him at flyweight, honestly. Somebody asking if I would see, James asking if I would say Tim Elliott is in the gatekeeping stage of his career. Tim Elliott has always been in the gatekeeping stage of his career. It took a season of The Ultimate Fighter for Elliott to get a title shot. And he followed that title shot up with going win, loss, win, and then 3 straight losses. He's never been a truly elite flyweight. He has always been a scrapper with a lockdown wrestle game who can out hustle people. He used to gas a lot, and he's put that under control a lot better now, ever since he trained with and then lost to gambling James Krause. His cardio has gotten a lot better, but yeah, I mean, he's just an old dog. He's a vet. He's always fought like a vet, and this was a solid veteran performance for him. So, yeah, people are saying to rebook the Tyra fight. Let Elliott try to beat all the Japanese flyweights. I would be fine with that, honestly. Let me see. He is a ranked flyweight at 11. So Tyra coming off of his, Tyra's up at 5. I don't know. Tyra, that you do not actually. I'm going to say no. Don't book the Tyra fight. Tyra has actually put himself in a position where he looks pretty good and could be a potential title contender. You don't want to use, and they already had, like, Asakura already had his title fight, so They already spent that nickel. You don't want to use a potential new contender on Tim Elliott because Tim Elliott is not going to be a reasonable title contender. No, you want to do like Tim Elliott, Steve Erceg, or you want to do Tim Elliott versus Ramazan Temirov, or people saying Horiguchi. Once again, you want Horiguchi to come in and be a contender. If he loses to Tim Elliott, that doesn't help the case at all. Elliott's not that guy. He's there to push back potential up and comers. I would say do Tim Elliott versus Ramazan Temirov. And yeah, that's what I would say. Or Tim Elliott versus Steve Erceg. Those would be the kind of fights that I think you do for Tim Elliott right now. I don't think you do. So even this, you say, I think the UFC just wanted to build name value to build up others. Tim Elliott is not the other. He's not the builder. You don't put Tim Elliott in a fight to build that person up. Tim Elliott is not Tim Elliott just absorbs the hype and then neutralizes it. He eats hype and craps out anti-hype. You don't get nobody gets thrilled for Tim Elliott after he beat your guy. He just fights other guys. Yeah, Tim Elliott he's 38 and he's always going to be fun. He's always going to be a great mid-card action fighter. He's going to be a favorite because he's old, almost as old as me. So I gotta, support that. But yeah. All right. And for Asakura, I hope they don't cut him. Usually the UFC gives people more leeway than this because they don't cut anybody. They need the bodies. But with high-priced fighters like Asakura, they're a lot more vicious about that kind of thing. And unfortunately, coming off of this kind of loss, you kind of need to feed somebody to him like Bruno Silva or something like that. Although Bruno Silva's fighting Park Hyun-sung apparently. You could do him versus like honestly, rankings wise, it doesn't make any sense at all, but you could do Kai Asakura versus Kai Kara France. I would actually want to watch that fight. That seems like it would be a great fight. But yeah, Matt Schnell would be the right kind of fight, or maybe like there just aren't a lot of other great options. Yeah. They'll have to figure out. You could do like Felipe Bunez, I guess. He's pretty much a veteran at this point or something like that, but you're really, reaching at that point. I don't know what they're going to want to do with Kai Asakura. All right. That brings us to a middleweight bout. Beisangur Susakayev against Eric Nolan. I was really impressed with how game Nolan was in this fight. In a fight where he was basically getting fed to Susakayev on short notice to round out a card that had lost too many fights. Nolan came out extremely ready to fight, and then he rolled for a knee bar. And that was terrible. It's short notice, thrown together at the last minute. He wasn't ready. I get that he was just out there vibing, trying stuff. Not the greatest looking win for Susakayev, but you got to go a little easy on him. This was his second fight in a week, I believe. So he got a finish in there. His goofy, smiley, you didn't really hurt me when you very clearly hurt me thing is annoying, but I'm going to give him a pass on all that. And hey, they put on an entertaining fight with no notice, so good for them. Lex Sajak absolutely demolished Gerald Meerschaert. I really thought GM3 would survive and have a chance to do better in that fight, but he did not even come close to surviving, so that's a rough loss. And yeah, I mean, keeps hey, if Alexejczyk can keep with the fighting nerds and keep getting wins, then he might actually be able to rise up a little bit in that division finally. This at the very least could get him fights with I don't know, somebody like Adolfo Vieira or Bruno Fajeda, I guess, or Christian Leroy Duncan. Those would all be fine. I don't know. I am impressed by Alexejczyk, but flatlining GM3 right out of the gate isn't also the most surprising outcome of that. We'll say Lupi Godinez, she looked really good for 2 solid rounds against Jessica Andrade. She's still not a big hitter. She still let Andrade back in the fight. Andrade looked probably the least inspired and most out of shape I've ever seen her look. Really terrible looking fight for her until round 3 when she was finally able to kind of work her way into the fight and step on the gas. But, I mean, in general, this has to be seen as a good win for Godinez. It's a terrible fight for Andrade at the same time. I'm really not sure where Andrade goes from here moving forward. I don't, she's just, I mean, she's still ranked number 5 at women's strawweight, but this doesn't feel like a ranked fight. Godinez, though, there are tons of fights out there for her. She could fight Jillian Robertson if she hasn't already. No, she hasn't. She could fight Jillian Robertson. She already beat Tabitha Ricci. She could fight Yasmin Lucindo. She already did fight Mackenzie Dern. But, yeah, I would probably say she could even do a fight with Tisha Pennington too, honestly. I'd probably say she should aim for the Yasmin Lucindo fight if I were her. That's Lucindo's got a pretty hot rising profile, and that would be a fight where Godinez would have a potential chance to showcase her wrestling again, whereas Robertson might be a pretty dangerous fight for her in that regard. And Pennington just tends to put on stinkers, so nobody would probably want to see that. But yeah, aim for fights with Lucindo or Robertson. That would be the most sensible. She got a solid win. Her boxing looked sharp, but Andrade looked really flat. I would probably say this is the time to do Jessica Andrade versus Angela Hill too. They fought in 2017. Feels like time to run that one back. All right. Brings us to Alexander Hernandez, Chase Hooper, and chasing the dream became chasing the reality, and the reality is that Chase should not ever spend a full round kickboxing with anyone ever. Ever, ever, ever. Whoever talked him into spending an entire round on his feet kickboxing with Hernandez and not just, like, I get it. You shot in and he stuffed the shot. Tangle a leg, pull guard. You did it to Jim Miller. You've done it before. Do whatever you can to scramble and make that fight get to the ground. But just hanging around and pushing forward on Hernandez with your chin way up in the air, trying to throw hooks, and his boxing game, just because he wants to be so aggressive, it's really targeted to fighting in the pocket where he's up even higher than he should be already, and Hernandez just flatlined him. So quality win for Hernandez, but for Hooper, this is just, this is a lot like the Steve Garcia loss, where he beat a bunch of older, smaller fighters, and now he's fighting a good athlete, and it just put a stop to it. So, yeah, he's going to have to go back to the drawing board a bit. All right, that brings us finally to Drakkar Klose, Edson Barboza, and this fight was just ugly. Close. He squeaked it out. I might have given it to Barboza for a very close round 1 and a very close round 3, but Klose did win round 2, and he won it fairly convincingly, and him getting one of the other 2 rounds from a couple of judges, that's fine. But it was an ugly, this felt like 2 fighters in their twilight not putting together a great fight. Klose is 37, Barboza's 39. Barboza looked chinny. Klose looks like he can't really step on the gas that well. Just didn't need it. Karine Silva beat Diani Barbosa, and the booth complained endlessly about this decision. I picked Barbosa going in. She had position control, but I love the judging to give this to Silva. I actually didn't see the first 2 rounds, but everybody seemed to have them split. And then Silva just did the best work in round 3. She had all the offense. She tried to win the fight. Barboza tried to hold her down. That to me is the definition of a fight Silva should get on damage. So I'm happy Silva won that. And Joseph Morales, he looked great against Alabidi Idris. Idris's game, it looked really sharp regionally, but Morales came out, put him on the front foot, and Idris is very much a draw you onto heavy counters kind of fighter. And then when you back off, he swarms. And you could see in this fight that he's just not used to having somebody in front of him who doesn't back off. Morales got in front of him, ate the shots, did not give an inch of ground, punished him all the way through for it, and took a really dominant win. This was a great fight for Morales, so great for him. On that note, card overall, I will give it a 4 as a pay-per-view, maybe out of 5 stars, 3.5 maybe, because the main card was really entertaining, and then the main event, this was a card where if the main event didn't happen, it was absolutely not a pay-per-view card. It was an exceptionally good fight night card with a pay-per-view main event. So the main event did happen, but it was also a completely lopsided drag. So yeah, I'm just going to say the spinning elbows were awesome, but I'll say 3.5 out of 5 overall for the event. So on that note, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find me on Twitter at Zane Simon, and over on Substack and Blue Sky at Zane Simon. Hey, we have a subscribe link down below. Liking and all that is nice, but go there, throw us a subscription, help us out keeping this all running. That's what really helps. I appreciate all of you for stopping by and listening, and we'll see you later. Adios.